In 1971, a group of America's brightest young minds volunteered for what they believed would be a simple 2-week psychological study about prison life. They would be paid $15 a day. They would role-play as guards and prisoners in a mock facility built in the basement of Stanford University's psychology building. It was supposed to be a controlled, academic examination of how institutional roles affect human behavior. It lasted 6 days. What happened in that basement would become one of the most disturbing demonstrations of human cruelty ever documented by science, and its lead researcher would spend the rest of his life defending what he had created. Philip Zimbardo was a respected psychology professor with a theory. He believed that good people could be made to do terrible things not because of who they were, but because of where they were. That the uniform you wear, the role you're assigned, the environment you inhabit, these things could transform ordinary college students into monsters. He wanted to prove it. He would succeed beyond his darkest expectations. 24 male college students were selected from 75 applicants. They were screened carefully. No history of psychological problems, no criminal records, no violent tendencies. These were normal, healthy, middle-class young men, mostly white, mostly from stable backgrounds. They were the kind of boys you'd want your daughter to bring home. They were randomly assigned their roles by coin flip, prisoner or guard, victim or perpetrator. The basement of Stanford's Jordan Hall was transformed into a makeshift prison, complete with barred doors, a closet that would serve as solitary confinement, and a small yard for exercise. On Sunday morning, August 14th, the local Palo Alto Police Department conducted real arrests of the 9 young men assigned to be prisoners. Squad cars pulled up to their homes. Officers placed them in handcuffs, read them their rights, and transported them to the station for processing. They were fingerprinted, photographed, and stripped naked. They were deloused. They were given prison uniforms, smocks with identification numbers, no underwear, rubber sandals, and a chain locked around one ankle. They were no longer called by their names. They were now Prisoner 8612, Prisoner 819, Prisoner 5704. Their identities were being systematically erased. The guards received khaki uniforms, wooden batons, mirrored sunglasses that prevented eye contact, and a simple instruction from Zimbardo: maintain order, but do not use physical violence. Everything else was left to their discretion. That discretion would prove to be the most dangerous variable in the experiment. The first day was relatively calm. The prisoners joked with each other. The guards seemed uncertain of their authority. But on the second morning, something changed. The prisoners staged a rebellion. They barricaded themselves in their cells, using their beds. They ripped off their identification numbers. They mocked the guards. The guards responded with a brutality that shocked even the researchers observing from behind one-way glass. They used fire extinguishers to force the prisoners away from the doors. They stripped the rebels naked. They took away their beds, forcing them to sleep on concrete. They created a privileged cell for prisoners who didn't participate in the rebellion, turning the inmates against each other. And they discovered the power of psychological torture. Prisoner 8612, a young man named Douglas Corpy, began to show signs of severe distress within 36 hours. He experienced acute emotional disturbance, disorganized thinking, and uncontrollable crying and rage. When he asked to leave, he was told he couldn't, that this wasn't an experiment anymore. This was real prison, and he would have to see the parole board. His condition deteriorated so rapidly that on the second day he was released. But 5 more days remained for the others. The guards invented degrading rituals. They forced prisoners to clean toilet bowls with their bare hands. They made them do push-ups, sometimes with the guard's foot on their back. They enforced arbitrary rules and punished minor infractions with hours in the hole, a dark closet barely large enough to stand in. They conducted late-night counts that lasted for hours, forcing exhausted prisoners to recite their numbers over and over until they could do so without error. Some guards urinated on prisoners. Some made them simulate sodomy. The cruelty escalated with each passing day, and the most disturbing aspect was this: the guards seemed to enjoy it. One guard in particular, who would later be nicknamed John Wayne by the prisoners, embraced his role with terrifying enthusiasm. He invented increasingly sadistic punishments. He spoke in a southern accent he didn't naturally have. He later admitted that he had deliberately tried to make the prisoners feel worthless because he wanted to see what would happen when human beings were completely stripped of their dignity. The other guards either participated or did nothing to stop him. Good men, selected for their normalcy, had become complicit in systematic abuse within 48 hours. The prisoners began to break down psychologically. They showed symptoms of extreme stress, anxiety, and depression. Some developed psychosomatic rashes. Several had emotional breakdowns, so severe they had to be released early. But most disturbing was how many of them internalized their roles. They began to refer to themselves by their numbers. They accepted the guards' authority without question, even though they knew this was just an experiment, even though they could have simply walked out, even though they were being tortured by their peers for $15 a day. Zimbardo himself became consumed by his role as prison superintendent. When a colleague, Christina Maslach, visited the facility on the 5th day, she was horrified by what she witnessed. She confronted Zimbardo, telling him that what he was doing to these boys was terrible, and that she couldn't understand how he could allow it to continue. Her reaction shocked him back to reality. Out of approximately 50 people who had observed the experiment, she was the only one to question its morality. The next day, after only 6 days of a planned 2-week study, the Stanford prison experiment was terminated. The aftermath would haunt everyone involved. The prisoners struggled with the psychological trauma of their experience. Many required counseling. Some reported difficulty trusting authority figures for years afterward. The guards grappled with what they had become, with how easily they had slipped into cruelty. Some expressed remorse. Others defended their actions or downplayed the severity of what had occurred. Zimbardo faced intense criticism from the academic community, not just for the ethical violations, but for the methodology itself. Critics argued that he hadn't conducted a scientific experiment at all. He had created a torture chamber and observed what happened. In the decades since, the Stanford prison experiment has been cited in countless psychology textbooks as proof that situations can override personality, that ordinary people can commit atrocities when given institutional power and permission. It's been used to explain everything from military abuses at Abu Ghraib to corporate misconduct to police brutality. But recent investigations have revealed troubling details that were hidden for decades. The guards weren't given minimal instructions. They were coached. They were told to create feelings of powerlessness and fear. The prisoners who broke down most dramatically may have been exaggerating their distress or responding to demand characteristics in the experiment. The random assignment by coin flip may not have been random at all. The truth appears to be even darker than the official story suggested. This wasn't just an experiment that went wrong. This was a researcher so committed to proving his hypothesis that he manipulated conditions to ensure the outcome he wanted, and in doing so, he genuinely traumatized vulnerable young men who trusted him. The question that haunts us isn't whether the experiment proved Zimbardo's theory. The question is whether Zimbardo himself became the very thing he was trying to study, an authority figure so consumed by his role that he lost sight of the humanity of the people in his power. In the basement of Stanford University, for 6 days, in August 1971, good people did terrible things, and the scientist who orchestrated it all filmed every moment, believing he was revealing profound truths about human nature. Perhaps he was, just not the truths he thought he was revealing.